My name is Kurt Riedemann. I am the councilman from the city of Torrance and the chair of this South Bay City Council of Governments this year. And so I'm delighted to host this forum in Torrance, and thank you all very much for coming. All 15 South Bay cities have been working diligently on completing their climate action plans. I know the city of Torrance passed theirs last night unanimously. With the help of the COG, the board has endorsed the concepts of sub-regional climate action plan, which is the focus of today's discussion. And we do hope that it is a discussion, not only from you, but from our expert commentators who will be adding their perspective to the presentations. A couple of logistics. There's going to be refreshments throughout the day, so please feel free to get up and help yourself. We will not have any breaks except for the lunch break. And also very important, of course, is the bathrooms are through this double wide door, past the large dance studio, and on your left, we have posted signs, and we're working to have bathrooms installed in the McConnell Theater, but that's another subject. Wi-Fi information is available at the table. Climate action planning for all 15 individual city climate action plans and the sub-regional plans were made possible by a grant from the Strategic Growth Council and a match from LA Metro. Part of the grant called for us to put on this forum to report on our findings and the lessons learned. As it turns out, we're very grateful for this. We spent so much time on the sub-region, we didn't take the time to share what we've learned. So thank you, Strategic Growth Council, for creating this opportunity. And we're extremely pleased to have Marlene DeLau from the Growth Council. Would Marlene, there she is, thank you, and be recognized. And thanks goes to LARC, the Los Angeles Regional Collaborative, who has been part of this grant for the purpose of helping us with this forum. The LARC staff is busy around the room, and I'd like to recognize their director, Laurel Hunt. Please, if Ms. Hunt is in the room, be recognized. She's being called, there she is. Hello, Laurel. We're recognizing you. And very special gratitude goes to Southern California Edison, who provided funding for the refreshments and agreed to sponsor the event. Robert Quintero, Director Local Affairs, helped to make this possible. Here from SCE today is Connie Turner, if she would. Right, there you are, Connie. Thank you. Thank her for lunch. Now, before we proceed, we have a couple of videos from our state representatives, and the very first video we have is from State Senator Ben Allen. So I think this is an introduction, so play the tape.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's my great pleasure to welcome you today to the South Bay City's Council of Governments Climate Action Planning Forum. My name is Ben Allen, and I proudly represent the South Bay in the California State Senate. The South Bay City's COG has been at the forefront of studying ways in which suburban areas can successfully integrate California's sustainability and greenhouse gas reduction goals. From neighborhood electric vehicle demonstrations to creating a regional broadband fiber optic master plan, the COG's work shows cities across California that it is possible to both achieve our climate goals and maintain the character of our regions. Thank you to the South Bay City's COG for organizing this wonderful event, and I really look forward to seeing all that you accomplish. Best wishes for a very productive day today.
Thank you, Ben. And now we also have a video from our Assemblyman, Al Marasucci, who couldn't be here but wanted to express his greetings.
Hi, I'm Assemblymember Al Marasucci, and I have the privilege of representing the beautiful South Bay from Manhattan Beach down through Palos Verdes and from the coast out to the 110 freeway. The environment has always been one of my top priorities. That's why I'm proud to support the South Bay COG's Climate Action Planning Forum. As we all know, climate change is perhaps the greatest challenge facing our planet. The devastating fires that we're seeing throughout our state are just some of the many dire consequences we will all suffer as the effects of climate change become more and more apparent. And now, with a president who does not believe in the science of climate change, it is up to us, our cities, and our state to take the lead in the global fight against climate change. I applaud the South Bay COG's leadership in assisting South Bay cities in developing their own climate change action plans and in exploring ways for cities to cut down on greenhouse gas emissions. I look forward to working with all of you in this fight against the crisis of climate change.
In the audience with us today, I do have a colleague that sits on the COG board with me, and I'd like to introduce her, and that's Ms. Olivia Valentine, council member from the city of Hawthorne. And just a wonderful segue, I'd also like to introduce a council member from the city of Rolling Hills Estates, Judy Mitchell, because she's with us today, and she's the former chair of the COG, and she was the chair of the Sustainable South Bay Strategy when it was adopted, and she's also a member of the South Coast Air Quality Management District and the California Air Resources Board, KPL. And I'd like to introduce her up here to the stage. Give her a hand, please.
Good morning, everyone. As Kurt explained, I'm Judy Mitchell. I'm a council member of the city of Rolling Hills Estates, and our city adopted our climate action plan last night. I understand that about 5 cities from the COG here have adopted the plan, so we're on track to meet our targets and get this job done. I wear different hats, as Kurt explained. I am on the South Coast Air Quality Management District Board, and I represent 51 cities in the western half of Los Angeles County. So I'm elected by the mayors of those cities. I also represent the entire South Coast District on the California Air Resources Board. There are on the Air Resources Board a number of air districts that have a representative to the board. And you're going to hear later from one of our board members who is not with an air district, but is the technical expert in the automotive industry, if I have this right, but and he's been on the board for quite a while, but is very knowledgeable. You'll really enjoy meeting him. I'll introduce him in a bit. The question we ask at the Air District is, what is climate change going to mean for us? One of the things we see is changing regional weather patterns. And we've seen that just this last week. The drought that we've experienced in the past few years has led to dried out vegetation. We have higher temperatures, and we've seen the fires, catastrophic fires, not only in Northern California, but also here in Southern California. What we see are, in our air district, we've exceeded the ozone standards set by the Clean Air Act, by the federal act. In the past 2 years, we've had an increase in ozone. There were 132 days in 2016 when we exceeded the standard, and this year, in 2017, 145 days. So these are the challenges that we face in controlling the criteria of pollutants in the South Coast Air District as we see climate changing. One of our big challenges here is that we have to meet a NOx standard, that's oxides of nitrogen, in the South Coast. Nitrogen, as you may or may not know, some of the scientists in the room, combines with sunlight to create ozone. So that is one of our biggest challenges, and as we see that ozone standard exceeded, then we recognize that we have a lot of work to do to decrease the NOx emissions. NOx emissions come primarily from motor vehicles, from the transportation sector, and so many of you may know this, but the local air districts are regulators of stationary sources of and the Air Resources Board is the regulator of these mobile sources. So what it has meant is that local air districts and our district has been in this stream of working very collaboratively with the Air Resources Board as we work together to reduce those emissions from transportation. One of the things that happens with climate change is inversion conditions. With warm temperatures, that creates strong inversion conditions, and that means enhanced smog formation. August was the warmest month on record, not just in California, but also in Oregon and Washington. We've also seen increases in the number of days each year where temperatures exceed 95 degrees. And we know that that will be even more exacerbated in the Inland Empire, in the desert areas, where temperatures are normally higher than they are here on the coast. There was a research program done at UCLA, Institute of the Environment and Sustainability, that told us that in coming years, if we continue with business as usual, we're going to see a region-wide increase in the number of days that are hotter than 95 degrees. And this research, as I mentioned, well, I didn't mention this, was done in partnership with Los Angeles Regional Collaborative for Climate Action and Sustainability. They are one of our co-hosts today, and we thank you for the research that you're doing in this area. We also will see reduced snowpack in the Sierras. We think that precipitation will be largely rain rather than snow, and this will have impacts on Southern California and on the state of California, because snowpack has been a way that we actually store water and then reap the benefits of that as the snowpack melts. But now I think we're going to have to change our behavior to plan for storage of water in larger quantities as we see precipitation go from snow to rain. One of the impacts of drought is that we have higher particulate pollution. Particulate pollution is dust and emissions from vehicles, but as the air is drier, then this is more easily dispersed in the dry climate conditions. Now last year we did here in the district our air quality management plan. We do that every 4 years. And one of our main focuses in the air quality management plan is reduction of the emissions from transportation sources. 80% of the NOx emissions comes from transportation. And so what we need to do that is we need to transform existing vehicles from gasoline and oil, reliance on oil, to cleaner methods of transportation. Battery electric vehicles, fuel cell vehicles, low NOx engines that use CNG, but a low NOx CNG. And so we have been working hard on finding incentive monies in order to make that transformation. So we're at a critical time at the local level, but we find it quite necessary to work collaboratively with the Air Resources Board so that we can accomplish these goals. And I'm very happy to say that that is happening. Our guest speaker today, as I mentioned earlier, is my colleague on the Air Resources Board. I came on that board in 2013, and Daniel Sperling came on that board in 2007. He was appointed by Governor Schwarzenegger. So he's the rock star of the Air Resources Board. He truly is. He is the founding director of the world-renowned Institute of Transportation Studies at UC Davis. And he's also a professor of civil engineering, environmental science, and policy. And he is an expert, not just in the technical part of clean air, but also in policy. He's a very good policy student and director for us. The Institute has built an impressive track record of strong, productive partnerships with industry, the public sector, and the environmental community, and to set a really positive example of interdisciplinary engagement and outreach in many areas of advanced transportation. The Institute has every 2 years a wonderful seminar at Asilomar up in Pacific Grove, and experts from all over the world come and speak at that seminar, and I've had the pleasure of going to that seminar the last 2 times that maybe it's been 3 times now, the last 3 times that it was held. Dan is long been recognized as an international expert on transportation. And one thing that happened after I came onto the Air Resources Board, it was just at the same time that Dan was being given the Blue Planet Prize given by Japan. And that prize is like the Nobel Prize for environmental sciences. And so that's why I mentioned that he's the rock star. So it's my very great pleasure to introduce Dr. Sperling this morning to speak with you.
Judy is so gracious, isn't she? So it really is a pleasure to come here. I've been interacting a little bit with Wally and Jackie here for a few years, and I really admire and support what's going on here. And so that is why I was enthusiastic about coming when they invited me. Because, starting big picture, this is a really transformational time. Not just politically, and there's all that, but even just looking at it from a transportation perspective. We have seen in the transportation sector in the US and California almost no innovation, no system innovation for over 50 years. Our cars are more efficient, our cars are safer and more comfortable, but basically they function the same way they always did. Carry the same number of people, travel the same speed, use combustion, combust petroleum fuels. And transit, same story. Our roads, same story. We've seen so little innovation. So, I'm here, I've been working in this area for decades. I have a colleague here, Marlon Burnett from USC, that has a similar story here. Came at it from more the planning side. But here we are now, 2017. And now we're on the cusp of a lot of changes, a lot of innovations, unlike anything I've seen in my life in the transportation area. We have basically, you can boil it down to, we have 3 major sets of innovations that are each transformational. We have the electrification of vehicles that's underway, has a long ways to go, but underway. We have this whole, what some people call sharing economy innovations, ride hailing, Uber, Lyft, microtransit, demand responsive type services that really are a first step towards potentially being transformational also, because, and I guess this is a message for all the city council people and mayors in the audience, is that UberX and Lyft, people love them, they're a great service, but they're really glorified taxi services. And local people, I know they like to grump about, creating congestion at the airports and downtowns and so on. But that's the wrong way to look at it. So one of my messages here, so this is not going to be my main message, but this is one of my messages here, is that your job at the local level is to support, encourage the pooling services, the Uber pool, the Lyft line, via not just to support them or accommodate them, but to champion them. That is probably the most promising innovation we have for reducing congestion, reducing the need for more infrastructure, reducing parking, as well as reducing greenhouse gases and air pollution. I mean, maybe later on we can question you. Are there any other better ideas anyone has? And I suspect not, at least in terms of the profound impact it could have. But that profound impact will be, so it's a profound impact in two ways. One is it gets us on a path, moving away from what I call this transportation monoculture. And that's actually one of my main themes here is, not only have we had no innovation, but we've created this monoculture, everything around the car. We don't even think about how we travel. We get up in the morning, we just go out to our car, we use it. That explains almost everyone. And people like to point to transit. And you know what? I mean, I used to kind of, try not to say anything negative about transit because it plays such a hugely important role. It's a safety net, it provides access to a lot of people, and it plays a very important economic role in dense areas. But overall, it accounts for about 1% of our passenger miles traveled in the US. California just slightly higher than that. For a metropolitan area, like the main part of LA, maybe it's 2%, 2.5%. It's tiny. And it's expensive. So the cost of it is about $1.25 a mile, passenger mile, if you take into account the full cost. The cost of operating a car, full cost, is about 55 cents a mile, just to give you some contrast. Now, we don't pay that as users. So I never used to say these things. And oh, by the way, its greenhouse gas carbon footprint is worse than cars per passenger mile. I never used to say any of this because, first of all, it's politically incorrect. But also because transit is important, and there were no alternatives. But now we have alternatives, from all of these app-based demand response services. Now, as I said, right now we're still in the glorified taxi version of it, and we need to move to the pooling. So the glorified taxi part of it, the UberX, it probably takes away a little bit from transit. Vehicle miles traveled, it's about the same, maybe even a little worse than just normal car travel. But that's not the point. And that's one of my big messages here is we've got an opportunity here to harness these pooling services, to champion them, to use them, to integrate them, partner them with the conventional transit, the bus and rail services, to partner with the cities in different kind of ways. We need to get creative. But if we want a substantial reduction in vehicle congestion, in traffic congestion, in vehicle miles, I think it's by far the most promising. And it's promising because it creates options. Right now, you raise the gas tax, you put any kind of impediment on car usage, and people get very upset because they feel like they're being punished, because they don't have a choice. And so all you're doing is punishing them. And to a large extent, they're right. So these kind of pooling services are really critical for creating choice. Then we can start getting creative and using different kinds of market instruments and pricing, creating incentives and disincentives to really continue moving us in that direction of these, what I call these pooling services. And that includes microtransit. LA Metro is launching a microtransit service with VIA and themselves in the very near term. So there's a whole growing set of options. But it's even more important because the third set of innovations that we're talking about that are transformational, probably the most transformational of everything we're thinking about and talking about, is the automation of vehicles. And that, by the way, is both on the passenger side and the freight side. I'll focus more on the passenger side for now, but we can get into the freight side as well. But in passenger side, so I'm a little skeptical that there's a lot of hype out there, in 2 years we're gonna have automated cars on the road. Ain't gonna happen. I mean, in 4 years, there'll be some very constrained areas where there'll be some of these vehicles operating, but in a major way, it's really driverless. It's gonna be a while, if only not because of the technology side of it. I mean, those vehicles are already safer than any of us. Us humans are really deficient. Just think about it. They don't drink, they don't text, they don't sleep. I mean, it's obvious they're much safer, and will be. But the public there's a lot of public perceptions as there's equity issues. Is it going to be for the rich? Is it going to undermine transit? Is it going to be high cybersecurity and hacking and privacy? So there's going to be a lot of public pushback, and so it's going to take time, but it's going to happen just because it's such a superior technology and people love it. But that loving means that we're going to want all of us are going to want one of those things, because right now, so when we have that, all of a sudden our time is freed up. In transportation, we calculate, should we build a new road or do something? We always take into account the most important benefit is how much reduction in travel time is it, and we then multiply that by the value, how people value their time. That accounts for 2/3, 3/4 of all the benefits. So, when we do these kinds of investments in infrastructure, so that 2/3 or 3/4 is going to go close to zero, because we can use that time in other ways. We can be so much more productive. And so being in the car will not be a cost at all. And so we're all going to want these cars. And you know what? That means not only are we going to be driving a lot more, because we can be in it and live 3 hours away and no big deal, because we'll be working or sleeping or whatever in the car. But we have these vehicles that'll be zero emission, zero occupant. We talk about single occupant vehicles. These are going to be operating part of the time as zero occupant vehicles, because, okay, you go down to LA, downtown, you go to work, you're going to be there for an hour or two. You don't want to really pay for it to park the car, so you just have it circle around the block, go off for a ride somewhere, and come back. It'll be a lot cheaper. And you can just start weaving those kinds of stories, and it's just an endless number of stories like that. And that means more congestion, more energy use, more greenhouse gases, etc. So this pooling idea is not only important now, but it's almost more important in terms of preparing us for when these automated vehicles come. Those automated vehicles better be pooled vehicles, or we're going to be in trouble. And so we need to create the choice now and the policies that go along with it to get us on that path. So when these automated cars come along, we just naturally flow into that in a more pooled way. So, by the way, I have a book coming out called The 3 Revolutions: Steering Automated, Shared, and Electric Vehicles to a Better Future, coming out in 2 months. So this is my only marketing of the morning. Island Press, February 2018, talking about a lot of these questions. So we've got this tremendous change. We're on the cusp of all this innovation. And the real point is we need to figure out how to harness it. We need to manage it for the public interest, because it won't, left to the market, left to consumers, it won't necessarily be in the overall public interest the way it plays out. So that's number 1. So the number 2 is, as I said, we've got this car monoculture. So how do we take this monoculture and start integrating some new ideas in it? We've got to get away from this monoculture. So that's why one of the reasons I'm so excited about the kind of services, the app-based services of Uber, Lyft, and some others, is because it's a foot in the door moving away from it. We need experimentation. We don't even know what will work because it's been so long that we've done any experimentation, tried any of these new things. You know, as I said, transit's the same, cars are the same, roads are the same. You know, we're doing a little bit, you know, SR 91 has a little, you know, real-time pricing, you know, congestion pricing on it. You know, there's not much more than that going on, or there hasn't been in the past. Okay, so I'm here to really strongly support what Jackie and Wally are doing, you know, with some of the ideas here. And one of the really important ideas is this idea of neighborhood electric vehicles. There's a lot of skepticism in a lot of places, but we've got to try things. And it intuitively makes sense, intellectually makes sense. It's like smaller vehicles, more efficient. Most of our trips are just short trips. So why do we need those big 4,000-pound SUVs to take us, to drive us a mile or two? Okay, so this is, I think, one of the important innovations. There's other innovations. I talked about some of them, and I think part of the challenge is to start integrating some of these opportunities and innovations together to create a set of choices and systems that really are more efficient, lower carbon, less expensive. We can do much, much better. I mean, we probably have now the most resource-intensive, expensive, inefficient transportation system imaginable that we've created. And this is the time. The time is now because of all these innovations to do it differently. Okay, so, and the last part of this story is getting more practical, back to where Judy was setting me up. And that is, yes, we have climate change, we have air pollution problems, and I'm not going to get into how bad it is. You know, you can just look outside and, you know, see the air and hear about the fires to know, you know, there's a lot of challenges we have, and climate change is getting worse. So what can we do about it? Well, in California, we're very fortunate to have a lot of opportunities to do something about it. We have the laws in place, we're creating the funding mechanisms to really help communities like this to be innovative, to try new things. The California Air Resources Board by itself has something like $1.5 billion per year in incentive money that it's spending in support of climate change and air quality. And most of it is transportation. That's a lot of money. And you know, a lot of it's going for trucks and ports and a lot of other stuff, but a lot of it's going for cars and local as well. And so there's a lot there, but another law, so getting a little wonkish here, but I think it's really important, is there's another law that was just passed. It's AB 617. But what it does is, it says, we're going to transform how we do air quality planning and management, and we're going to focus on neighborhoods and communities that are really exposed. And it says we're going to focus on disadvantaged communities, but I think it's going to go beyond that eventually. But so we're saying, okay, where are the problems? Where's the exposure? Who's being affected? It used to be, or now, you know, we find one monitor that's out of compliance for the whole South Coast region, and that's it. And then we come up with a whole South Coast-based strategy for doing it. We're changing that. We're going to be changing that. It's going to be much more specific, which I think is a really good thing. And it's going to be focused on where the problems really are. And technically, there's going to be a lot of challenges on, because pollution moves, ozone is, NOx emissions is emitted here, but the actual ozone is, can be quite a ways away. So there's a lot of little pieces to it, but I think what's important is two things. Politically, there's huge support for this. It's a lot of support in the legislature. The legislature has been transforming quite a bit. There's a lot of support for environmental justice, disadvantaged communities. And what that means is it's translating into money. So I talked about the climate or the ARB money. So a lot of this is going to go through ARB as well. But there's going to be a lot of money generated because now there's a real strong political constituency for spending this money in the local area, especially for disadvantaged communities. And it's going to turn out, when this law was passed, in fact, in the title of it, I don't know how much I should, wave all the dirty laundry here, but in the title of it, it says this is for stationary sources, for non-vehicular sources. But what they're starting to figure out is most of the problems in most of these neighborhoods is not from the refinery, it's not from the toxic waste dump, it's from old trucks and transportation. And so I think what we're going to be seeing, so this is just getting started now, what I think we're going to be seeing is more of a focus on what can we do in the local area, to support initiatives that will reduce pollution. Neighborhood electric vehicles would be I think a prime example of the kind of things that are going to be supported. And I think there's going to be a lot of money. We're just in the beginning stages of this, but it really provides an opportunity. So, to sum all that up, we're on the cusp of all kinds of changes. We've got political support for making these changes work in a way that's good for all of us, and it looks like there's going to be money to help it out. So what can be better than that? Thank you very much.
Well, I'm sure you agree with me that having Judy and Dan here was great, and we're delighted that they could join us today. I'm Jackie Backrack, and I'm the Executive Director of the South Bay Cities Council of Governments, and we're all thrilled that you could be here with us. As you can see from the program, I want to make sure that for those of you that are looking for what we're going to get to, we're going to get to a call to action. We're going to get to next steps and things that we can ask the state, the region, and the local level to do to improve the process of meeting state goals. We think the state is behind in meeting its goals, and we think if we all look at new, innovative ideas, we can get there and get there in a reasonable amount of time. I want to make sure that you looked at our handouts on the table outside and are prepared to join us in February for our General Assembly, so please make sure to take those handouts. I wanted to ask, how many people are here from the South Bay? Okay, so there's a lot of people not from the South Bay, that's good. And how many people have been involved in climate action planning? Okay, so a lot of people haven't too. Okay, well, I'd like to start with, and what we're going to talk about today is different ways of doing things, and the fact that right now it appears that we're headed on a one-size-fits-all, and we want to talk about variations to that. So I'd like to start, I think it's pretty good to start with who we are. We are the South Bay, and if you can see the map, we go from Inglewood to the Palos Verdes Peninsula, from Carson to the ocean. And there are many South Bays in California, but I want you all to know that this is the real South Bay. Anybody asks. And as you can see, the most exciting thing to me when we talk about the South Bay is how diverse it is. We do have the beach, we have the hills, we are extremely different. We have rich communities, poor communities, we have little downtowns, we have strip malls, we have everything here. And we have a variety of incomes, we have a variety of minorities. We're a microcosm of California. And I think that's what makes us a really interesting place to look at, because we are so different and various and can really test things. We found that testing things here is good because we are very diverse. I went the wrong way? No, I didn't. I went the right way? Okay. So the development in the South Bay started really early on, but we developed a lot over the Pacific Electric lines, and a lot of our streets, you can tell, are wide because there used to be a red car going, or a yellow car going down them. And then we pretty much developed out in the 50s and 60s. Now we really are a pretty built out, dense suburb. And you can see we have single family homes, we have a lot of duplexes, we have low but higher density multifamily dwellings. So we have a little bit of everything here, and it is fairly dense at the end of the day. But we are not well served by transit. And that is something that has caused us to look at what other ways we can serve our population. This is the transit map. And on the right side, that's the present bus rapid transit lines that come into the South Bay. We do have local lines. I have to say some of our local lines operate 15 minutes in the peak hour, but then they don't even operate on weekends, or they have very, very infrequent service. But that's the bus rapid transit lines, and you can see much of the South Bay is left out. The one on the left is interesting because that's the future rail stations. The purple is going to be the new transit rail station that would be ready maybe for the Olympics, and that's as far as rail will get into the South Bay for the foreseeable future. So what's the point? Why are we here? And I did want to say that most of California we think looks like the South Bay. That the transit-oriented focus is really not going to be a strategy that addresses where we are, and that is the point why we are here. And so we want to tell you about climate action. You've already heard from Judy and Dan that transportation is the main sector. It's 40% of our emissions in the South Bay. And if we wanted to try to make progress, you could see that the red is the gap of where we are in meeting state goals. We're not very far. We got to try something new if we're going to get this done. And then this chart tells you what inspires us. Because of all of these things, we don't want to just write another report. We want to be a laboratory. We want to really test concepts. We want to try things, and we want to make sure that we really know what people will do and won't do, and not just be theoretical about it. This chart starts in 2010, but we actually started in 2003, and Wally will go into some of this with a lot of research. We looked at transit-oriented development, we looked at growth, and we said, this is not going to work for us. It's going to create more density and more congestion. So we did a lot of economic analyses. We looked at centers, we looked at corridors, and we did a lot of reports. And our reports are actually outside on the desk if you want to look at some of them. In 2010, however, we began our demonstrations, our urban laboratory. We did a neighborhood electric vehicle project for 2 years. It's supposed to be a one-year project funded by the AQMD. We did no publicity. People saw the vehicles in the neighborhoods, and we had to give the drivers notes saying how you could get one because they were stopped all the time by people wanting to know how to participate. At the end of the first year, we had 250 people on a waiting list, and so we had a second year, and people loved those vehicles, just loved them. And then we went into a battery electric vehicle demonstration with Leafs and Fits, and people used those. We learned where they charged, how they charged their vehicles, what they did, what they liked, what they didn't like. We did focus groups. We have a lot of data. We went from there into realizing that we couldn't crack the electric vehicle market completely because half the people lived in multifamily dwellings. And so how do you charge if you live in a condominium or an apartment house? So with UCLA, we did a study on looking at the housing stock and the age of the housing stock in the South Bay and how that would fit with the electric vehicles. And now we're going into our two concepts that were mentioned by, I think, one of our legislators, looking at how we get broadband and a strong regional backbone in here to not only enhance transportation trips, but to keep people, to avoid trips so that people can work where they are, and then also our slow-speed network, and you're going to hear a lot more about all of those things. We realize we need to look at both transportation and land use. They do fit together, and transportation informs land use and vice versa. And then, as Dan said, we are an auto-dependent society. And we're trying to get and you know, we have few bicycles, but not very many bicycles. What we're looking at today is introducing different concepts, all kinds of different concepts. There are very many different ways of getting around, and they can all be part of what people think of as a mode that they can use. And then land use. Transit-oriented development is on the left, and what we're looking at is neighborhood-oriented development. You're going to hear a lot more about that. It's not no density, it has density, and yet it has slow speed and other very, very neighborhood concepts for getting around. Today we're going to be discussing, this is your agenda for today, and as I said, it does end with a call to action, and we are going to be discussing how we got here, what we did, what the ideas are, and how they came to be. When it comes to planning for climate actions, one size doesn't fit all, and data is or are critical depending on what dictionary you read. We had a big discussion as to whether that should say are or is. Apparently both are correct. So, okay, so both are critical, and what we found is that right now there is only one size and there's only one set of data that is being used. And so we're going to be introducing today more information and a different concept for data. And now I want to introduce the program and give you the meat of what we're all talking about. Our principal researcher, and who has been working with us for a long time and has he's got electric sparks coming out of his head, I think, is Wally Simbab. And he's going to be presenting the first module, I guess. And he has been working, I want to just say, with Moshe Rhodes, who is the senior research associate that's been working with him for 10 years. These concepts and methodologies have been refined and given to us by Wally and Moshe, and we're really thrilled about that. We're going to have our speakers, and then we're going to have audience questions and commentators who will give their opinion, and we're going to have commentators once in the morning and twice in the afternoon. And so we want to make sure that as you listen to this, please put your questions down. You don't have to write them for us, but write them for yourself so you don't forget. And with that, I'd like to introduce Wally, and we'll start the show.
Thanks, Jackie. I normally sit alone so people don't get hurt with the sparks, but thank you all for coming. I had no idea that climate action planning had such cachet. I mean, we figured like 15 or 20 people, and so here we are. So I want to start with this as a symbol of what we're trying to accomplish. This is a goal, I think, that I hope that the regional planning profession adopts, in that we want a virtuous cycle between land use and transportation, so that as we succeed in one part of it, it actually helps the other part of it match, and they feed off of one another. So keep this in mind as we go through the day. This is something that we're trying to achieve. Okay, so we all know what the problem is. I think Dan and Judy and Jackie have nailed this pretty well. There's too many of these burning too much gasoline and producing too much pollution. And we all have a pretty good idea of where the solution has to go, where the strategy has to go, and that's to electrification, at least in a large part. And so there are various ways of doing this. The fleet transition strategies. The federal government, up until recently, was offering a $7,500 tax credit. I don't know what its status is, because this whole tax bill is up in the air, but it doesn't probably look promising. So that probably is going to go away. The state has been directly subsidizing the purchase of electric vehicles. They're offering $2,500 at the high end, and I think what's important to know about this, the profile of this, is that it's for large battery vehicles that are more or less emulate the performance of a gasoline vehicle. So it's how far you can go and the speed you can go at and so forth. That's what our state policy is to subsidize those vehicles, and we'll talk a lot about that shortly. At the local level, because after all, climate action planning is a local policy question, there's not a lot you can do to accelerate the market for electric vehicles. Priority parking, for example, EVs can park here, whereas you can't if you're driving a gasoline vehicle. the charging infrastructure, how it's deployed, no parking minimums, or when you have a remodel of a house, putting in charging infrastructure and so forth. So there's not a lot that the locals can do there. But taking a look at the big picture, this is the goals up there in red for EVs that Governor Brown established through executive order. And we, in fact, one of the, for the state policymakers, one of the things that we want to emphasize is that it's very hard to do this sort of tracking if you don't have the data. So through a variety of cunning and guile, we have an Energy Commission grant in which we bought like 6 or 7 years of so-called pulp data, which gives us market data by vehicle type. So we're able to sort this out and plot this, whereas most subregions and most cities cannot. So one thing that would help is if the state started providing the basic data for how you're doing so that you know whether your policies are accomplishing anything. Anyway, you can see from the curve, I think 14, 15, and 16 are actual data, and the rest of it is a projection of some sort. But you can see we're not really going to come close unless something dramatically different happens to reaching the state EV goals from executive order. And as Jackie pointed, this is a borrowed slide, we're duplicating each other. We're not really getting there with the carbon goals either. And I think, and Judy mentioned, I think, a very important thing, which is the criteria pollutants, which come from coal starts. And that's not to be minimized. So where do we go then as local governments? What are we left with, given that there's not much we can do and the market's not doing well? And by the way, the South Bay is an excellent market for EVs. Affluent coast, affluent peninsula, still not doing well. Well, it starts with this basic insight, and we're going to talk about 3 miles a little bit. And I just wanted you to have a sense of what 3 miles looks like in the South Bay. This is centered on Hawthorne and Torrance Boulevard, which is sort of kind of the south center. and 3 miles is a heck of a lot of territory when you look at it. It'll go all the way from the ocean over to the 110 and the 405 freeway. So, and so it's 6 miles across. The diameter is 6 miles. The radius is 3 miles. So we're going to talk a lot about it. And when I first saw the data, I thought, oh my goodness, all these trips are within 3 miles. That doesn't make any sense to me. But when you look at it, it's like, well, gee, 3 miles is a long way. So this is like a fundamental insight we're going to come back to. So through the various demonstration projects that Jackie talked about, we were able to measure automobile, or the demonstration vehicle use, and the household normal vehicles, the internal combustion engine vehicles, with GPS. So we know this is gold standard data. And so what we know is that a third of all of the trips taken by households are actually, about a third of them are within a half-a-mile walking distance. Very few are actually walked, although in our study areas, we got a half of the trips to the center were walked, so that's pretty good in special places. Also, over 10 miles, 37%. What that means in terms of VMT, 2/3 of VMT are generated by trips that are under 10 miles, which again, when we start talking about some of these limited range vehicles, that's easy to accomplish. So the distance matters. This is an important consideration analytically and in policy. If you're going to go to a short distance, there's a whole lot of options. I mean, you can walk, you can roller skate, you can take a skateboard, you can take a golf cart. There's a lot of things you can do if the distance is short. When you get to long distance, if you're going to go from here to Riverside and you're going to do it in any effective amount of time, you're really going to drive. There's not a whole lot of options available to you to do that. And I'll give Judy credit for this. Our trips are too long to walk and too short for transit. You actually said that in 2010, and we've been quoting you ever since. It's a great phrase. But it is a certain conundrum. And when we wrote our neighbor electric vehicle report, we said they're too long to walk, too short for transit, and perfect for short-range vehicles. Now, virtually all these trips, as Dan mentioned, are driven in an internal combustion engine vehicle. But the issue here is to focus not just on the ICE vehicle, which we all know is the problem, but it's the fact that it's used for all purposes. It's sort of, this is how we grew up doing this sort of stuff. Now, what is the #1 body style sold in a gasoline vehicle today? It was sedan for many, many years. Now it got bigger. It's the SUV and the crossover. And part of that is the American culture, the open road, the idea of having freedom. I mean, so much of what's in our culture is the freedom to go anywhere we want, whenever we want. And in fact, I did a photo exhibit many years ago on gasoline stations, and we called it Freeling, because it's such a part of what we all expect our freedom to be. So even though this is a trip, we can all drive to Florida in one of these cars. We don't do it but once a year or once every 2 years, but nevertheless, there they are. This is actually how we use SUVs. We go, I love the guy who's parked over the line. We any errands or whatever in the neighborhood, dropping off kids, boom, there it is. We're on our SUV. So let's focus down from internal combustion engine vehicles onto the actual uses over these short distances. So yes, bikes, pedestrians, and transit are part of this equation for sure. They're a traditional part. We've been talking about that for many years. Local use vehicles, NEVs is one type of them. We talk about less, and when you start looking at the benefits from these things, it's kind of shocking to me that they're not more in the equation. They're not talked about more. Part of it, I guess, is that the regular long-distance gasoline vehicle has literally billions of dollars of advertising behind it. If you ever watch a Laker game, you cannot get away from. And they say, oh, and this is tremendous mileage. We're getting 24 miles to the gallon. And of course, it's laughable. You should be getting infinite miles to the gallon, not 20. Anyhow, there's a lot of commercial support for what we're doing and for our society. The infrastructure that we need is a slow-speed network, which we'll talk about a little bit. This is more than a bike lane. And level 1 charging all over level 1 because our small vehicles only require level 1, and level 2 is a whole nother problem, and we'll talk about that in multiple family dwellings shortly. So we came up with this sort of simple graphic some years ago to say, can't we get people to pay attention to where they're going and get the right range vehicle for that trip? I mean, you would not eat soup with a fork. And so here we are driving SUVs down to the 7-Eleven. And in our research, and particularly in the focus groups, which was not the quantified stuff of GPS, but the qualitative information that people come from sitting around the table talking about what they thought about their experience driving these things, we did not find anyone, particularly in the BEV world, the ones that were the full-speed, long-distance battery electrics, who had a clue as to what their actual transportation was, what their actual use of the vehicles were, including their internal, and they consistently overestimate their need. And it was fascinating. It was like group after group, they'd all come up with the same thing. They don't know, and they think it's more than what they need. So again, this is a countercultural phenomenon, but as opposed to range anxiety, we're talking about sort of range sizing, range fitting. We want to get people to understand what they actually need and go do it. So this is Gem 4. This is the high end of the This is the high end of the local use vehicle world. This is one of the ones that we used in our demonstration, so I wanted to show that to you. I love is it a kayak or a surfboard? Surfboard? Paddleboard. Okay, good. So there's local use vehicles. There's a whole family of these that no one's ever talked about. And you can see some of them here, but then we have break them down into some sort of subcategories. So electrified mini cars. The one on the upper left is called a kangaroo, by the way. If you're in a wheelchair, you just roll yourself into it, and then you can drive the thing. The characteristic of these are they go maximum range of 25 miles, maximum speed of 25 miles an hour. Electrified small utility vehicles, electrified personal transport. I mean, why not? Why not? If you're going to Ralph's and it's 3 blocks away, why not? Also, we had a photo in here, but we took it out, was of the robots that are delivery robots that come out of you're using them in Manhattan now, and it just delivers stuff to your house. So you can go on your roller skates, and then you can have the robot deliver the stuff back to your house. And then human-powered vehicles, and clearly bicycles are part of what we're hoping to see more of. The thing I would say, though, is that the dialogue around this stuff is not human-powered vehicles, it's about bicycles, as if the 2 wheels are somehow more important than 3 wheels or 4 wheels. And a point we would like to emphasize is that anything that's human-powered, and here's an array of things here. There's a swell quad cycle, and I don't even know what the thing on the left is, but there it is. What we have to start being open to is anything that goes a short distance that fits the purpose of your trip. And if it's a bike, fine. And if it's a trike, fine. So we're talking about an infrastructure change. We're talking about, in this case, this is Lincoln, California, and this is actually there on the ground. They put a bike lane and then a golf cart lane or an NEV lane next to it. If you've got the right of way, that's fine. They also have places where they combine them. And what we're doing, this is our Connie Rubini, who did a terrific job on this under a Metro contract. It's not part of the Growth Council, but it's a piece of the puzzle that fits. Came up with a master plan for our slow-speed network. And a lot of folks are very upset about the idea of losing through lanes, and I get that. This is more of a Sharrows kind of situation. So we're not really taking any right-of-way away. We're just simply saying, let's designate a network of places. So if you're driving one of these things, you know you can go with others. So you can mix bikes and golf carts and tricycles and other, electric whatever. And we've got the Dominguez Hills Channel that we're looking at, which I think is 15 miles, is that what it is? 10 or 15 miles long, which is not used for anything right now. So we could make it into a kind of a throughway for slow-speed vehicles. That's what our hope is. Now, it also happens that Coachella Valley, the CV Link, which is a lot, people talk about it. I don't know if it's when it's going to actually hit the ground. But it's a 50-mile slow-speed network, multimodal slow-speed network, so that you're talking about the same thing we're talking about, NEVs and bikes and all of it mixed together. This has been under development. AT&T put a ton of money into this, I think, yeah. So let's look at some of the virtues of if you drive a local use vehicle. Well, okay, so it satisfies a lot of the household trips, and it's a simple vehicle. We also have a slide in here and took it out with the number of parts that go into a Volkswagen Golf. There's 30,000 parts of that vehicle, and there's like 600 in an NEV. So the idea that it's so simple, and it's a great first or last vehicle in the household. So a teenager can drive it without the fear of hurting people, and seniors, like myself, can drive it without fear of hurting people. And I don't know how, it's at least once a year, somebody my age hits the accelerator, goes to the brake, it goes through a plate glass window, and kills a lot of people, or the poor guy in Santa Monica that took out the farmer's market about 5 or 6 years ago. These are simply safer vehicles. Relatively low cost, relatively maintenance-free. It's not like you have to change the oil. Maybe the tires, I mean, these things go, what, 2,000 miles a year or something like that, 1,000 miles a year? It's not like you're going to be driving to Riverside every day. Reduces congestion because they're small, the footprint's small. So whether you're in a parking lot or whether you're on the street, the fact is it's taking up half or a third the space of an SUV. They're lightweight, so they increase street safety. I'm always reminded, my neighborhood has speed bumps, and it drives me crazy. I know these speed bumps, and some of my neighbors think it's a stop sign, so we queue up behind this person. If you go 20, it's a speed bump, it's about going 20 miles an hour. So if you go over 25 miles an hour, you're there. So that I haven't. Why not have, I suppose there were a road diet, why not have a vehicle diet? And that's what we're talking about, is that the only things go 25 miles an hour, then you take out speed bumps. That's the way it is. And they don't tear up the asphalt as much. You can charge them on level 1, and one of the big issues with the BEV, the full speed one that we discovered in our demonstration, was that these are, charging at home is what people would do, because you're there every night, so you plug them in, 8-10 hours later, boom, they're charged in the morning. Not so if you're in an apartment building, because our research showed that very hard to upgrade, expensive for owners to upgrade apartment building infrastructure for level 2. So this comes back at the end of the day to what ARB's policy in terms of subsidizing vehicles is. And half of the units in the South Bay are in multifamily dwellings. So in effect, half of our households are not really in a position to buy these things because there's no way to charge them at home. Important consideration. Now, Dan also talked about the AVs when they come, the autonomous vehicles. Our sort of logic on this is that your local used vehicle is going to be completely compatible with this world. I always look at the cab lines in any foreign country. I've been in London in the rain, and there's like 45 minutes of people waiting to get a cab. So the peak period is going to be an issue whenever. So you want to go on your app, you want to call your autonomous vehicle, but it's going to be a minimum charge, and it's going to take time to get to you because there's going to be a queue. So why not just go to your garage, jump in your golf cart, and go to the 7-Eleven or whatever it is you're doing. 70% of these trips are under 3 miles. Why wait and why pay the minimum charge? You want to go door to door on demand, there it is, it's in your garage. So we welcome the AVs and think that we're completely compatible with it. Back in the NEV days, we ran a couple of numbers. And so we've got about 300,000 secondary vehicles in the South Bay, and a second and third car per household. So if we were able to get a third of those, these are the kinds of carbon emissions that we would be saving. And then, really a radical idea, what if everybody who was driving under 5 miles, which is over by probably 80%, what if they started driving electric? And we can get 100 square miles of forest in exchange, 50% reduction in all emissions. So this is such a fertile ground to be explored. It is kind of shocking in its own way that it hasn't found its niche yet. So I want to close this section with actually a quote from Dan Sperling. So, the adoption and use of a neighborhood vehicle might improve mobility and offer improvements in neighborhood designs. In other words, neighborhood vehicles could be space serving as well as space shaping. That's back in 1991, and that's where we're hoping we're going. So I'm going to pause right now, take a few questions from the audience, and then we'll go on to the land use part. Lights come up. Question?
Just comment about the local use vehicles.
Yeah.
I think they would be more ubiquitous if the costs were to come down. Period.
Yes, I will repeat the question. The gentleman said he thinks they'd be, we'd see more of them if they weren't so pricey. Well, it's funny you say that. We are in fact negotiating, early stages, and it's an uphill negotiation, to get the ARB to give us a South Bay Clean Vehicle Rebate Program where we would turn it upside down and actually subsidize these local use vehicles. And again, it's not all of them. Hermosa Beach, Ken Robertson was telling me the other day, they bought a couple of e-bikes. They're like $900. So if you take the local use vehicle as a broad category and not just NEVs. NEVs are expensive at 10, 11,000, something like that if you want doors. Although many of our people didn't want the doors. They like the air and their teeth and all this kind of stuff. So we're looking to actually have a full-scale deployment of this if we can get the subsidy turned upside down, so we can get a third off. And I might say, in our focus groups, people love these things. And they said, and the sweet spot at which they would buy them would be around $5,000 or $6,000. And we think they'll fly off the shelf. So we're working on it. And your point is excellent. Jim?
Well, do you have something for elected officials trying to implement the bicycle lanes on streets? I had a situation I was trying to do that on Western Avenue, coordinating with Viscayano, share the street there. I had such a backlash from the neighbors saying it's going to cause traffic issues. That probably cost me my election, basically. When you have to help elected officials educate people, and how do you deal with the kickback of it's going to cause all kinds of traffic issues?
You're right, and I'm sorry about your loss. We liked you on the board quite a bit. I don't know, Dan Sturgis sitting over here reminds me years ago that if airports weren't where they were and we were trying to add airports, they would never get done because the crowd of neighborhoods would come out and say, oh my God, these things will fall out of the sky. And you're exactly right. There's a very difficult, change is difficult, nobody wants it. And what I think that we're dealing with though is that was, let's take away from the right of way. We just had a big hassle over here in Playa Vista, right? What we're saying, let's not take that away. Let's simply create routes that are designated for slow-speed vehicles. So you wouldn't go on PCH. You would go on a street that's parallel in which doesn't carry a lot of traffic. And then if you needed to go to a place on PCH, you'd work it so you could get through an alley or somehow come in from the back. So I think in some ways, and I think it gets back to sort of what Dan was saying, is that there's a doctrine in which forces a monoculture, supports a monoculture. And if we're going to be creative and do this, there's other ways of doing it other than taking away through lanes. And that's what we're hoping to find. And if we get the I mentioned Connie Rabini doing the slow speed network. We've got a proposal into Caltrans to do that. And so we'll see if we can get it, if we can start looking at all these alternatives so that people, courageous elected officials don't lose their job, okay?
Well, in our situation, we're gonna take away the parking, and just, it wasn't taking away any lanes, it was just taking away the parking lane, and designated bikes a little bit. And it still had a huge backlash.
Parking is right next to, the most important thing that you can get. I know my wife and I get annoyed when a neighbor visitor parks in our spot in front of our house. So I mean, I get this. I mean, I get it. It's just, you have to go about this in a sensible way, and apparently that didn't happen. Oh, Mr. Dan Sturgis.
Just a quick comment, actually. So I started with my partners the first neighborhood electric vehicle company, funded in 1994, and now it's the Gem Car. So I've worked in this for a long time. But the thing is we're talking about changing our culture of transportation in such a significant way. What Wally's talking about is really a two-tier mobility system for our cities, which is the fast, heavy vehicles, our conventional cars, and then a whole new category of light, low-speed modes. And the thing I wanted to say is when I look at outreach and what company's going to come to the South Bay and solve all these problems, it's like even if General Motors could do it or Google could do it, we've got to change. We have to get, the car dealers are going to lose their business. I mean, there's a huge transformation that needs to happen. The opportunity that I want to mention real quickly, when you're creating a light, low-speed mode vehicle, they're very simple. I mean, in theory, they could be 3D printed. In theory, they could be designed by middle school children. So essentially, when you look at the light, low-speed modes, whether it's an electric bike or a trike or a cargo bike or an NEV or a local car, we could be creating all new ways of doing community outreach that include engaging our communities, children, whoever's interested, the coalition of the willing, to actually be creating the products that they see driving down the street. And I think that's very compelling. If you look at public outreach that I've studied, it's not been doing as much as we want. We took LA City, Claire Bowen, LA City Planning, she goes out to the community and says, what do you think of my plan? This is the 2035 plan. Do you like it? Do you like where the bike lanes are? Do you like that we have buses running down the 10 freeway? Now, you don't know about autonomous cars. You're not an expert on mobility, so what are you going to say to that? But we have an opportunity to really rethink, on a systems level, how we engage the public. That's my comment.
Thank you, as always, Dan. Anyone else with a question? Yes, sir.
Just a comment. I think that a way to think about this proposal is to explain to residents that this is a way of preserving your neighborhoods. It's not changing their neighborhoods. This is actually a way of preserving how you live. Because there's always going to be extra traffic, extra cars. This is a way of making it easy for you in your town to get around without being affected by all the traffic and congestion.
I really agree with you. These are very difficult things to pull off because people are so convinced they already know everything they need to know about it, and they already know they're opposed to losing parking or losing a through lane or doing something different. I mean, that's why we're looking for the subsidy to start putting local use vehicles on the road, because you get to a point. I mean, we had this whole internal discussion, and well, gosh, what if stoners are using them to go to the beach and surf, right? I mean, and I say, so what? Because the more vehicles like this that are on the road, the more the culture changes. We're talking about changing the street culture, and the way to do that is to start getting the product out there and getting it in use, regardless of what it's for. I can't say that to ARB, and Dan, please don't repeat this when we get out there. But really, it's okay.
I'm just curious, do you sort of envision the local use vehicles being household owned or being shared in a neighborhood?
Another excellent question. Have we ever met before, you and I?
No, not yet.
Actually, no. We've got a broader scheme than that. Yes, certainly some and many will be owned. We know that there's a parking problem, particularly in transition. I know when we were working in Hermosa Beach, Ken pointed out that there's some of the parking areas, the older buildings, the older homes have very small parking areas, and you got your car in it. Now you're going to sell your car to drive one of these? Well, maybe eventually, but not now. So yeah, we are aware of that problem. Some people will go ahead and get them, and as they say, they charge in 110, so it's not hard. But we're looking at apartment buildings where if you're going to have a rec room and a swimming pool and this kind of stuff, why not also have a local use vehicle so people can use it on a timeshare basis and just go and do their 7-Eleven thing and come back. So yes, we want to do that, and that's part of our proposal that we're taking to ARB. The other one is in low-income neighborhoods. We've been working with, off and on, various community nonprofits, and we had one all set up to go with car sharing, where they would use the vehicles for their own purposes. They would put a driver in it and do a kind of a Lyft type service, and then they would also make it available for people to use in a low income area. And the big emphasis, and I don't mean to rip up ARB anymore, but the idea was where they funded car sharing in low income neighborhoods with $45,000 cars that would be car shared. And we were sitting here going, why don't you share a car that you can buy at the end of the day? You know, I mean, why not make it an $8,000 car as opposed to a $40,000 car? So there's, yes, we're looking to do that. We only get the money to keep going. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, what's being done in the area to promote neighborhood-oriented development in terms of general plan updates, land use, visioning, zoning, that sort of thing?
Well, that's another excellent question, and I'm not going to answer it. No, we're working on that. In fact, why don't you ask that again? I'm about to do the land use section, which is in many ways more complicated and more challenging and harder to describe. Jim, you have another question?
Yeah, I just wanted to share with you. I just wanted to share with you that I got back from Indianapolis, and they have something called Blue Indy. And what they have is all over the town, they have little air stations where they have these little electric vehicles that you can go on a membership, and once you plug it, you have a certain time cost and so on. It's very, very minimal. And once you go to your next station, plug it back in, you're off the grid. So there are examples in other cities I think we can look at as models for this kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's our grand demonstration that we're trying to get funded, which would be multi-year, multi-million. You know, our feeling is we've gone as far as we can go with these small-scale demonstrations. We've done all this research, we've collected all this data. Now it's time to really go full scale, and this would certainly be part of it, that kind of like bike sharing operation where anybody can pick it up and drive it somewhere else. But the design of it alone is extensive and expensive. But we're very hopeful that we're going to get this done in the next year, so we'll see. You can be on our advisory panel, Jim. Okay.
Hi there. I was wondering what's the marketing plan for young families? Because I know for people in their 20s or just starting out careers, or even after the kids have moved out of the house, those seem to me like easy markets. But where a lot of the larger vehicles, it's coming more with safety for transporting your children. And I know that most of the trips that I do that are like 2 to 3 miles are soccer practice or preschool drop-off, those kind of things. So what's the marketing plan for and also, are these safe, and how can that be kind of achieved? Because the South Bay is, opposed to some of the other parts along Santa Monica Bay, a very family-friendly area. So I feel like that's one of the key markets.
Another good question. What we found in the NEV demonstration was that we didn't have to do anything. We were worried about marketing, and we went to Riviera Village one Sunday to a farmer's market, or wherever the heck it was, and we had 50 people sign up then, boom, and then we put signs on the cars as they drove around, and that list went to, Jackie left the room, but something like 250 people, just without any marketing. People simply wanted to drive them. So in terms of the children, many of our 50 families had children, and they did exactly what you're talking about. Take the kids to dance class, take the kids to soccer. And there was never an incident. And the thing to remember is, because there's a lot is made about, well, they don't have airbags, and some of them don't have doors, and they're not safe and all that. They're a lot more substantial than a bike, and no one worries about your kids riding a bike. Maybe they should, but there isn't. And second, these things make everybody else safer. I'm talking about safety later on. I've got some graphs about getting hit at different speeds by age. Doesn't look good for my age group. So I try to stay home a lot, just so we know. But again, I think it's about, they are safe. They're safer than a lot of other things. And we'll just, I don't know, let's let the market decide. Let's roll these things out there and see.
Are
our household that used it the most was a family of 4, and they actually put their SUV to rest, and they even bought an NEV, so it worked very well.
She doesn't mean they buried it, they just let it rest. This, by the way, is Moshe Rhodes, who is going to be doing the heavy lifting here. I'm doing the fun part. I'm just sketching out the big proposals. Oh, okay. We have an actual dealer. Amy is here somewhere. Where's Amy? Yay. Amy actually sells these things in Redondo Beach. Yeah. And we're going to go visit, actually, in another week. So we're looking forward to a lot of reconnaissance from you. But all of you could come over and see Amy afterwards and bring your checkbook, right? Okay. Okay, one more.
Hi. Have you ever biked in the South Bay? Have you ever tried to ride a bike? Has anyone in the COG tried to ride a bike?
Actually, Aaron and Dan ride bikes all the time.
It's slightly dangerous, so I'm curious. You know, Sharrows are widely recognized as the worst form of bike planning or transportation planning for multimodal, right? So I'm curious if the lanes aren't going to be dedicated to these types of vehicles, and they don't have the same safety procedures as some of the other cars. Drivers in the South Bay drivers in Southern California in general are a little aggressive. I mean, I'm very, very concerned or very interested to see how you guys plan to address this type of thing.
Well, I'm certainly not an expert in this area, and I respect your experience. Dan and Aaron ride bikes extensively, and they're associated with the COG. But the answer, I think, is maybe not very satisfying, is that over a period of time, it's about more people doing this. And once you reach a certain threshold, you go past the tipping point where everybody expects to see slow-speed vehicles out there. So it's not very satisfying. So a few of us will die in the meantime, but then life is uncertain. I don't know. It's a terrible answer. I understand. I do think it has to do with Dan.
This gentleman was talking about how to get the cities ready. We could be using a tool called microsimulation. We could look at Redondo Beach and do microsimulation of a mode where we had 25% local low-speed modes. And these little vehicles, you're saying all the right things, but like, think if you're a police officer and half of the vehicles in El Segundo don't go over 30 miles an hour. That's a safer city. I mean, who's going to rob 7-Eleven on a golf cart? And so, but basically, it's a chicken-egg problem. You know, I've thought about like just taking the measurements of downtown El Segundo of 6 blocks and going up to Lancaster and mocking the whole thing up like a studio and just actually running it through with all these little vehicles so people can try it and test drive it. But your bike ride is going to be much safer if people get out of their cars. And I think more people get out of cars for an e-bike or a golf cart than just get out of the car for a pedal bike right now.
I guess my issue with that is that in Torrance, I see that the population reaches nearly 2 million, right, during the day. So people are not coming from El Segundo, they're coming from all over the county. They're not going to be driving these neighborhood vehicles. And in my experience, when I biked on the streets here, even when I bike on the streets in Long Beach where I live now, people are driving cars from other places. They're driving very quickly, and I know it's a problem. I know we're beating a dead horse. There's an issue with right-of-ways and yielding, that type of thing. But a lot of people are going to be coming from outside of these areas.
Our general attitude towards this is let's try it. We got to do something because this is not, whatever we're doing is not working. And if there is a safety hazard, it doesn't work out, then we will report that and try to figure out a way to do it. There's nothing else we can do but try it. Are we ready to go on? Because I think we got a time issue here.
I'm just going to say real quickly, the people coming, so let's say that person's coming from Long Beach to Carson or whatever, they might need a low-speed vehicle to get to like a van pool or to a lift meet pool. So we have to build a network. We have to think systems, and we have to think how to create networks for these vehicles so we can basically get rid of second, third, and fourth cars, whatever it's going to be.
Okay, we have to move on. So here's the land use part. And the land use is, to me, the more interesting part of this virtuous cycle. It's important because it establishes the spatial relationship between origins and destinations, which give us the distance, and as we want to reduce that distance, then we have to work on the land use side. And where we're going is towards a walking world. We're looking at walking neighborhoods, not walkable, which tends to be a sort of an aesthetic consideration or a landscape architecture. We're talking about economics. We're talking about actual walking neighborhoods where people are going to destinations because it's economic to do so. so I want to, this is a picture of the typical post-war auto suburb of which we are all living. And all through California, this was built all across the country after the war. And I just want to take a minute and put historical perspective around this. This happens after the war, so 47 to 52, 53, 54, somewhere in there. The thing we should remember is that in 1945, the European and the Japanese War was over. VE Day and VJ Day was in 1945. Prior to that period, there had been great sacrifice and deprivation by those families. There was food rationing. There was rationing of all sorts. This was following the global depression of 1929 and the crash of the economy. And so then you roll into these war years where 300,000 Americans were killed in action. The automobile plants were frozen the production was frozen from 1944 to 1945. There were no new automobiles. The economy was reeling except for the war machine. And so after the war, here's this great relief by everybody, which is, oh my goodness, what a hellacious 15 years. Haven't been able to buy anything, material and personal losses. And so into that context comes this kind of development. Now, we had 10 million soldiers coming home, people, men and women in the military, in 1947, 48, 49. This was the kind of housing stock, the tenements, that was predominant. And remember, not much had been built during the war years, so it's old, it's crowded, and this is what they were going to be coming home to. Now, so is it hard to turn this down when that's your choice? It is like a gift being given to society, and particularly these families who went through so much. And I myself, so it becomes the American dream. It becomes the American middle class dream because it helps rebuild the economy. There's all these roads being built. There's all of these cities being built. This was Lakewood, the city of the future, that there was the first slide. And look, affordable single-family housing, good schools, friendly neighborhoods, safety everywhere. Down here on the right, those three people, that could be me. I lived in a house like that in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in the late 40s. And boy, I tell you what, it was good living. We loved it. The house I lived in wasn't a tenement before that, before the war ended, but there were 4 generations in about a 900 square foot house. So this was fantastic, except for a couple things. One is, it didn't scale up very well. So here's Kunstler, who writes this. He's a wonderful writer. He's a funny guy. I've seen him speak a couple times. He hates suburbs. And so here he is calling this the most destructive development pattern the world has ever seen. Greatest misallocation of resources, very, very strident. It's worth mentioning this, although that dates from 1994, because we just came back from a conference in which this theme is carried on. Believe it or not, there is a war going on between it being led by academics and well-known regional planners. The whole sort of planning culture is very, very upset at single-family housing. And they're saying it's the root of the problems in terms of all this carbon stuff and the mobility issues. So what also didn't see was that the thing that literally fueled these new cities was gasoline. And soon on, it became clear that, oh my goodness, there's some toxic qualities to this. It causes air pollution. The most recent one, it could be destabilizing since so much of it comes from a very unstable part of the world. We spend, depending on how you value gasoline, when we first did this study, it was at $4 a gallon, so it's less today. But it'll be back, don't worry. $1 billion a year spent in the South Bay that you all could put into something else, like education, which is also getting expensive, and climate change, of course. So the other part, not only did they not foresee the toxicity of gasoline, which was literally the fuel, but they made the mistake that those suburbs, let's call it the floor plan, because I never referred to the floor plan of the suburbs for a while. The floor plan didn't scale up very well. And so in the South Bay, we've had roughly, I understand, it was all built out in 1960 roughly, so there was no more vacant land. So everything that got built between 1960 and 2017, 2018 replaced something else. And when we replace something else, generally speaking, it's denser. And so we've added, a lot of commerce. I mean, the original residential suburbs, they already went downtown to work, and that was a good idea. But as Robert Severo points out, in 1987, you have all of this sort of commerce now finding its way. And I'm talking about business parks and lots of retail malls and so forth like that, that are adding to the activity base that's on our precious suburbs that delivered at one point this great middle-class lifestyle. So we have to change the floor plan. Not so much going forward, but because we've been using the wrong floor plan for all of these 60 years. So what can we do about it? This, of course, is a result from it's a suburban gridlock that Severo's talking about. We all hate this. I mean, it took me 45 minutes to get here this morning, and I live around the corner, and it's crazy. So we've got some things going on for us. That we know that 40% of all of the commercial space, all the building space in the South Bay is in retail. Well, there's a clue, because retail is changing in front of our eyes, being technology driven. And so if we're going to do anything to change the floor plan, it's really going to have to involve the presence of retail. There's a shift in location. It's overbuilt to begin with. I haven't seen an economic study that didn't say retail wasn't overbuilt. And we also have new things coming, like Nordstrom Local, which a lot of people are making, using as examples. But goodness, does it make sense to go into a 30,000 square foot department store? Apparently not, because they're going away, where there's all this inventory there, so that you can buy it and walk out with it. Well, that inventory costs a ton of money. The space to keep it costs a ton of money, and the staff that has to completely always reshelve it costs a ton of money. So Nordstrom said, well, let's try an experiment. Let's do that. Where you just come in, we give you a high-level service, we can get sizing machine, all kinds of stuff, and we'll get you the piece that you want tomorrow or the next day. No different than Amazon Prime. So there are these changes coming in the retail sector, so let's go after the change in the floor plan that it does with retail. So what if, little by little, strip retail was replaced by housing at 25 DU per acre? This is not single family, but it's also like townhouse. This is not going to kill you at 25 per acre. And our preliminary economic analysis of this, I don't want to talk too much about it, says this can be done with 25% affordable housing. So that helps your transportation problem on the other side by providing housing for people who don't have to commute in and out. So this is what it would look like. Graphically, this is what we're talking about doing. Taking these existing older retail strips that for the most part are underperforming. I will say this, we tried to do this analysis. I could not get a South Bay finance director who would share with me what the revenues are, so I cannot identify what's underperforming, what isn't, although we know there are underperforming places out there. Although the place we're going to use an example in a minute that I would have said, here's a great place to redevelop. Buck says he shoots pool there. So, okay, sorry, Buck, you'll have to go somewhere else. And what we're talking about is moving that to the corners, or any place where there's a concentration. I'm going to get into some specific things shortly. But we picked the corners because it's a traditional crossroads. It's where a lot of traffic goes because they're on a crossroads. So if we started concentrating destinations, and your destination density should go up, and your residential density shouldn't. And talk about losing your job over increasing, having public policies. Increasing housing density is a sure way to get a ticket out of town. And so what we're saying is you really don't have to do much with that. If you can deal with 25 DUs per acre out on the arterials, we can build the density in terms of destinations. And we want to cluster destinations, so that's what we're trying to do. Okay, so here's the example. Here's where Buck shoots pool. This is Hawthorne Boulevard and Torrance Boulevard, which was the center I used for that 3-mile thing. There, sort of in the top center, is this strip mall. You can see these things all over the South Bay. We just picked it because we picked it. That's it from the ground floor. And here's what we could do with it. You can see the multimodal electric vehicles out here. You can see Segways, which are very underutilized personal mobility device. lots of pedestrians. And something that looks like that, as opposed to that very, very ugly mall. I mean, apologies to someone here who owns that property, but anyhow, well, we hope not. Anyway, this is the sort of vision that we're looking for. Now, what if we transition those destinations? We call them destinations because they're not. It isn't important whether it's retail or a hospital or a school or whatever it is. They're destinations, and so to us, they're all just destinations. So we're going to move them to an intersection. Now, this is right up the street. This is 189th and Prairie, right? 182nd and Prairie. So there it is. It's there today. It's what it looks like. And here it is from the ground. Yeah, OMG. Nothing here to really hang on to in terms of a place you love. So it's a big mall on that side. And so here's what we've got. Here's the square footage that's there. And here's the number of 23 businesses on that intersection. So hypothetically, what we're talking about doing is increasing that to 125 on the same footprint. That's a real magnet. You want to think about what these things are as we change them. They're magnets, and they're going to pull trips from all these surrounding half-a-mile neighborhoods. So everybody wants to go there. And in fact, our data show from the original study that a place like that could attract half of all the trips that anybody in that half-mile radius takes. It's tremendous. And the data show half of those half trips will be walked. So this is the basis for a walking neighborhood. So we, about a year and a half ago, with a SCAG grant and an artist named Larry Onaga, who was wonderful to work with, we put together this simulation of a neighborhood center that would have this magnetic property with those 125 businesses, and exactly on that lot. So this could be built exactly on that lot. I mean, obviously it probably wouldn't be. And so here's a couple of views of it. I'll take you around. By the way, it's an interesting exercise for yourself sometime, your planning departments. Sit down and ask them what a neighborhood center of 2025 might look like. It's a very interesting exercise. So it's dense, and we can see out on the street, we've got a through lane, we've got places where it'll be where your Ubers and Lyfts can stop, except there'll be small vehicles, so cyclists, there's NEVs. You can see at the top, we've spent a lot of time looking at that because one of the benefits of autonomous vehicles is that they can platoon, so there's no distance between them, so it's a subtlety of the drawing, but I call your attention to it because we're so proud of the insight. So here's just different views of the whole thing. At one point we had a footbridge going across, but of course that would cost way too much money, but we were just having fun with it, so it's okay. And here's around the back, that's like an AV bus with this grasscrete, and people can go out and, it's like a little park. So the idea is we would want to make it a neighborhood center where people come for social reasons as well as economic reasons. So how do we get all that density? So this is a typical kind of floor plan for such a commercial building. So this is what we do. We make the footprints really, really small. Interesting, Sears is also coming in behind Nordstrom's with a very small footprint building. So this present. So retail is changing. We've got to be able to capture it. It's sort of what Dan says. You can't leave this to the market. Here's a chance for cities to get out in front in terms of what they want. Not what the commercial developer wants. What do you want for your community? So, and here's like a nice little fountain, which, pitch a quarter, and we can send some kid to college based on the money that people throw in there. And there it is at night. And so we come back then to our virtuous cycle, except now it's got neighborhood centers, local use vehicles, the infrastructure for local use vehicles. And is that my last slide? It is. Okay. Well, good, then I stop. So now we'll take some questions, and we're going to have our esteemed commentators come up and sit. Invite them. Who are we inviting? Alan, Marlon, Dan. Going to put you to work again, Dan. And Judy. And the idea is to get a dialogue going between us and some of these folks are team members, some of them are not, and you. So this is a chance to not only just talk to us, but you can talk to real experts in this field.
to have me here.
I would like to be here, thank you.
Wally's much taller than I am. We're delighted to have our experts here. You've already met Judy and Dan. Marlon Bornett has been with us for, what, since 2003, I think. Very, 5 years?
2005.
2005.
Let's not
very initial
overestimate.
stages. Marlon has been helping us with Wally's ideas, truth testing this, and so he has been a team member. So and then Alan Pullman, who will be back, has also been working with us. He's from Studio 111 on our climate action plans, and Studio 111 has worked with each of the city individual climate action plans. So he's going to give that perspective. While I'm standing here, I noticed that we have been joined by Britt Huff, who's a councilwoman from Rolling Hills Estates. Britt, she's our first vice chair. And excuse me, she's the brand new mayor of Rolling Hills Estates. Yes, as of last night. And I don't know, is Allison still here? Allison Toll was here from Senator Ben Allen's office. Just noticed that. Okay, so why don't I just throw out initial reactions? Anybody want to start by reacting to Wally's ideas of, not Wally's, our ideas of transportation and land use, and pick one? And Judy?
Is this on?
Yes.
Is this on? Okay. Well, speaking with my hat on for the Air Resources Board, I'll start by saying that the rebate program that the board has in place has always focused on these full electric, battery electric vehicles. I mean, the full size ones. They've pretty much ignored neighborhood electric. And I think it will be, for Dan and me, a kind of a struggle to get a turnaround on that. I fully support what we're doing here and find that this innovative approach is really a good way to go, because we do need to be more innovative. We do need to think about what are the trips that we take, how long are they? And the experiments we've done here in the South Bay have been remarkable, what we found out from the program we ran in 2010. But I do think it's going to be a heavy lift to get a turnaround. But Dan and I are interested in working on this, and we have been working on this with the staff at Air Resources Board, and I've been working on this with some of the staff at AQMD, because AQMD has the ability to do outreach on some of these things to have exhibits and where we can show people these vehicles and put on that kind of a display. The land use part of this, and now I'm going to put on my local hat as a city council person, it's so true, one size doesn't fit all. But that really means kind of taking a look at your zoning, what we're talking about with centering commercial centers and community centers on four corners of an intersection. Those are zoning issues. And if you're doing general plan updates or considering zoning issues in your city, you could take that into consideration. I think neighborhood-oriented development is really remarkably applicable to our kind of community. And when we were working on this, I thought you've got communities that are pretty far out of the center of LA, like Calabasas, Westlake Village, some of those places. They're never going to have transit either. That's probably just not going to happen. So how are we going to develop those to reduce VMT and achieve the goals that we want to achieve? So just a few thoughts from this angle.
Alan, do you want to go next, or should we go down to
I'm sorry, I just came in
Yeah,
late
so
for a second.
why don't we,
Okay.
Dan, do you want to go, and then we'll come back to Martin?
I'll just support what Judy said. I've said a lot, but I think it is important to start rethinking both how we run our subsidy programs, rethinking how we do planning. So I'm actually very interested in what Marlon has to say about that part of it. We got these mature, medium density suburbs, and I think we need new ways of dealing with it, both combining the land use and transportation, and I think these are exactly some of the right ideas. So I will work with Judy on the money side.
Well, as I said, and Ellen, you didn't hear, I introduced you as a team member, but Marlon has been with us since 2005, and give us your perspective, Marlon. You've been an asset to this process.
Thank you. First of all, I want to compliment the South Bay COG and the member cities and everybody here. What is happening here is something that is, in part, really incredible, that the COG has envisioned something and done the difficult work of collecting data, of analyzing those data, of thinking of plans, of communicating it over a period now that stretches well over a dozen years. There's another part of that that's not incredible at all, because I'd argue this is just what we do in California. We're a place that is wired to think about the future. We always imagine that tomorrow will be better than today. And so to some extent, this is just us being us, right? And I say that because we know that nationally, not everyone is totally on board. But here, we do think about how the future can be better. This is, a key theme is experimenting, not having a one-size-fits-all model, breaking out of a car monoculture that has been wrapped up with a land use monoculture. And I want to come back. The way you do that is to innovate, to experiment, to evaluate, and to adapt. And you can only do that if you have robust data sources. And so this is what you are set up to do. I think the moment is right. We can see those experiments all around us. We can see how this might be happening. From the planning perspective, one quick thought. The USC Planning Department faculty, we spent about a year thinking how we should think about our curriculum. We landed in a very similar place. We decided that a lot of planning had been incorrectly envisioned as how do you regulate cities. We decided that's not what planning is or should be, and that we are redesigning our curriculum to train the innovators, the experimenters, the people who will think of things that none of us had ever thought of, evaluate it, adapt it. And I'd love to take complete credit for that, but I suspect in part we were led to that because I have been working with the South Bay for so long, and I was probably primed to see that. So if this little endeavor that we're trying at USC is successful, you folks get part of the credit. I probably won't give it to you, but you deserve it anyways.
Okay, so I'm glad to be here today. I'm an architect and an urbanist and planner, and it's exciting to hear, and working with the South Bay Council, the idea of innovation is really kind of important because there's so much information. I think, Dan, you talked about innovations that are happening in transportation. I think this is a time where forward-looking cities need to embrace alternatives. That's really where I think the focus should be. And when it comes to a larger kind of issue I think we're facing as a region, it's happening in the South Bay too. I think there's a larger kind of discussion that threads through a lot of the talk here about going from a sort of individual choice, individual lifestyle, your own house, your own backyard, and your own individual transportation model, to something that's a little more collective. I think that's an evolution of from suburbs as they kind of grow to something more collective. So we may not, public transportation is a collective sort of process, and a multifamily housing, which is what we'll probably be adding to our cities, is much more collective. So there's a kind of a change there in sort of behavior and culture that I think needs to be sort of discussed, because I think behavior and how people approach both transportation and land use is modeled on how you think about how things should be. And so when you talk about Uber Pool, I think that's really, or pooling, so again, it goes to this more collective way of getting around, a more collective way of being, a more collective way about having public space. We're kind of public space poor in Southern California. Now we're looking, how do we add public space? So as an urbanist, I get so excited about some of these opportunities. The big things on streets that all architects and urban planners are thinking about is how can we repurpose streets to be about more than just moving cars, to be also about people, about community. And those are some of the opportunities that I think cities have to really be at the forefront of experimenting with that.
And Alan, I'm glad to hear you refer to this as yourself as an urbanist, because I refer to myself as a suburbanist. And in fact, part of the stress, I think, that's going on in the planning world is that the only solution, the suburban problem, the only solution it has is to urbanize. And that's, in fact, something we're trying very hard to resist. Now, let's talk about the carbon problem for a minute. And I don't know whether this is perhaps just somewhat rhetorical, but think of the criteria that should be applied by society, by the state government, in terms of strategies that are going to be deployed. And what are those criteria that make for a successful strategy? I would suggest that, taking from what we're talking about, it should have minimal total cost. It should have minimal public sector cost, because you can't always go to the public sector to make these big investments, measure MSI with what's it, $1 trillion. And it should be fast deploying, because anybody who's been outside, you can see the fires, the Northern California's on fire, we're on fire. It's all about climate change at some level. We don't have time to fool around, so we have to do something that moves fast. So one of my concerns is that the transit density strategy, which is the urban strategy, is very expensive, totally. That is to say, not only are you going to have all this expensive corridor that you're going to build, but you can also have private development in transit development coming after that, and that's another $1 billion. And it takes forever to build this stuff, and we're talking about 2040 or something like that with some of the rail lines. So anyway, what do you think about criteria? Again, it's somewhat rhetorical. I apologize if it's totally rhetorical. But what would be your reaction to what are the criteria that we should be applying to our strategies that we're promoting?
Well, I don't know about criteria, but when I say I'm an urbanist, I mean I think about cities, but suburbs are part of cities too. So I'm certainly not against suburbs at all. And I think there is an orthodoxy you talked about, besides Joel Kotkin, of everyone else saying that suburbs are bad, and I don't view that as the case. But I think suburbs are evolving. I guess my point is, when you're thinking about, I think cities have challenges because they have a lot of competing demands that they have to try to meet. Yes, we want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and cut down on pollution, and that's a fundamental discussion today. But they also want to create mobility. I think when you ask people, if I went out to the community here, what's a bigger problem, greenhouse gas emissions or congestion? You know, on a daily basis, congestion probably top their list. So cities have to deal with people really worried about congestion because it's not getting any better. But I think there, like for instance, the slow speed network, we've talked about it a lot. I think it's a really powerful thing that has a lot of co-benefits that should be discussed. And that's always the other thing. Can you talk about co-benefits? Like, people are concerned about safety. I don't know how many pedestrian deaths are happening in the U.S. right now. I'm not even talking about collisions or just pedestrian death. There's quite a lot of people that die, and I think it's actually going up. That number is going up. Maybe it's over 6,000 people a year. That's kind of a catastrophe that we could avoid somewhat with the slow speed network, with the idea of lighter vehicles and slowing down traffic. And I agree. One of the most concerning things is with low gas prices, people are buying SUVs, which are, consume more gas and also are dangerous for the population. So I guess what I would say is that all these things, we can't look at climate action planning in isolation to be successful. We have to look at it in an integrated process of how we build better cities for our citizens and for the residents, and be able to communicate the co-benefits with them as well.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And Dan Sturgis keeps sending me these texts about thinking of it as a system. I think I've gotten 2 this morning already. And it's really, and the good thing about it is that when we think about our climate goals, when we think about our urban livability goals, we think about goals of transportation, congestion reduction, infrastructure costs. The strategies for all those goals are pretty much the same strategies. And they're the kinds of things that we're talking about here. And so, this idea of operationalizing some of those and actually just doing it really is exactly right. And, to tie it in with the transit part of it, transit works really well in dense corridors. And what LA Metro is doing with the rail lines, that's good. They're creating the network. And now the challenge would be, in addition to the local use that we're talking about here, is the what we call the first last mile connectivity. And, because most people are not going from where one rail station is to another. And a lot of people going in the neighborhoods are, could make use of it. And so creating that connectivity, creating that, depending on, let transit revert back to what it's really good at. And in the end, we'll probably have more conventional transit. We'll probably have more ridership as we utilize it better, and it'll be cheap. It'll be better and cheaper. And the challenge is to fill out the gaps. There's these micro-transit ideas, I think, that are good ones to fill in where there's gaps. There's the Uber pool, lift line type services that can access the stations and also fill in the gaps. So, the theme here is there's lots of opportunities, and I think, Wally, I like what you say is, I just translate it as, let's just do it.
The one thing I would say is that what Dan mentioned is that transit does well in your central, highly dense urban area. And when you look at European cities, Paris, for example, they've concentrated subway and transit in the center. They have this circumference around Paris, and then I can see that you could, get in your car and drive to the circumference where you can get on the transit and then get into the city. Except we may not use a car, we may use an NEV or something else to make that trip. We live in a community that is so sprawled out. And I think what's difficult in our region is there are several different commercial centers. You can identify Beverly Hills, Hollywood, downtown Los Angeles, Santa Monica. We have a lot of different commercial centers, so we need to think about how we work within that framework and how we structure our transit to get to those urban centers. But in the suburban area, or the suburbanist, we would use different method of getting around in all these other different modes that are like neighborhood electric vehicles or other modes of transit that we've talked about, these smaller vehicles. So that's kind of a sort of overall bird's eye view of how we might, accomplish what we are working for.
Let me second everything that's being said. The beauty of where this vision has come to is that it's very simple. There's a land use component of neighborhood-oriented development, and there's a mobility component that really looks to electrification, looks to different kinds of vehicles, right-sizing the vehicle. But if you had to explain it to somebody, you could start just right with those two pieces. Let's better rationalize the land use and have these little neighborhood centers where you could walk. And the picture that you had, Wally, is wonderful, because that you could really create something that I think most of your constituents would say is more attractive. And then that goes hand in hand with right-sizing the vehicle, which includes moving a lot of that to electric power. On the neighborhood-oriented development, remember that that 25 dwelling unit per acre in the middle of what could replace that little strip mall, that's basically about double the density of a lot of South Bay neighborhoods today. This is not something that is that dramatically far away. And people worry. I hear people in my neighborhood all the time saying, I don't want to be Chicago. I came from New York City. I don't want to be that. And I mean, I live in Irvine, for goodness sake, and so I don't quite get what they're saying. But anyway, so I mean, this basically visually looks the same. It's two-story. In fact, by sight, it's a place that I think by a lot of the criteria, family-orientedness, safety, visual attractiveness is better than what would be replaced. It leaves large parts of the existing neighborhoods untouched, and does provide some location for a little bit more housing. And I love that post-World War II, middle America dream. Those houses, and I live in close to one of those houses, appraised at over $1 million. This is a cool dream. It's a dream that's out of reach for our kids. And so there is another piece of the puzzle. We do have to find some place to put a little more housing. And this plan fits right in with that. So this is a very high-functioning vision.
I just want to say, like 25 units per acre is very achievable with townhouse development or small lot development. It's not multifamily housing. It's not 4 stories. It could be done at a very neighborhood scale.
And that's really, really important. Thank you. Now, you must have some questions. You rarely see experts and political leaders like this all together, so I hope you take advantage of this opportunity. Yes.
I want to say I think the neighborhood-oriented development is a really compelling idea. It's very interesting. I'm just curious. I want to know if it's been considered about sort of the regional shipping and distribution aspect of this. There are a lot of industrial areas still in the South Bay, right, that are underutilized or that are utilized. But as retail moves towards this model where things are, coming to after you've come to the store, there's an opportunity there, if I'm not mistaken, to encourage maybe Macy's, Sears, or other smaller companies to have a smaller regional distribution center, which can then take advantage of that slow lane or small electric vehicle for a distribution either to your house or to the store if you want to pick it up there, which further kind of augments that slow lane idea that you guys have. So I just wonder if there's any.
I think you're exactly right. And I'm going to do 2 more segments before I quit for the morning. But one of them is to do with it. This is predicated on a network of neighborhoods and a hierarchy of centers. I mean, when we sat down to do this, we thought, wow, gee, 5 hours is a long time. When you start looking at the material you got to present, 5 hours is nothing. So we'll take names on the way out in case any of you want to see another 5 hours. So maybe. Of doing a little bit more detail, and certainly that kind of thing is part of that detail, so it's a good question. But anybody else with a panel, do you guys want to ask these guys there?
Well, it seems like we have kind of 2 discussions going on. One is carbon footprint, one issue, climate action planning forum is over here. The other one seems to be kind of quality of life issues, congestion, community, a sense of community where you live and so on. I'm not sure where I fit in. I live in a remote suburban area, but I got here carbon neutral. I have a solar energy system, I have an electric vehicle, and that's how I got here. So where does someone like that fit in the discussion? Are we having 2 discussions, or are they interrelated? I'm trying to put it all together.
Yeah, that was kind of the point I tried to make a moment ago, that all this, whether you're talking about livability or health or climate or infrastructure cost, the strategies are mostly the same ones. So we're here, coming up with the actions to achieve those multiple goals, and most of the actions we're talking about, check off those goals, and including equity. Actually, something that we haven't really mentioned so much is, we're doing a poor job of access. If you're physically disabled, low income, elderly, young, you're pretty limited with this car monoculture system that we have here. And so a lot of ideas we're talking about also serve that. And then there's the other part on the urban goods that was just mentioned before. I mean, that's another big change. Wally mentioned, part of it is retail stores are getting smaller, but it's partly because they're relying on online, and Amazon's building more warehouses and doing 2-hour delivery. And so we need to, work all this through, because that's another example of where it can go really good or really bad as we go forward. But I think we're all here, even though we might have different goals, we prioritize differently. I think almost everything we're talking about here is something that meets one of those goals, or meets most of those goals.
I do think you bring up an interesting point, because for a long time our thinking was that the most sustainable, most environmentally friendly way to live would be in a city. But I think what changes, like if you have solar power, and there's been an ongoing revolution in battery technology, which I think really funds a lot, or is going to spur a lot of this mobility transition, whatever kind of vehicle it is. So with these kind of changes, maybe living out, in a suburban area where you have lots of solar access and you have the ability to drive a zero emission car, it's really changing the paradigm of what is a sustainable way to live. And I think that's a very interesting point.
When discussing the various land use alternatives, what are your thoughts on mixed use development?
Well, I think the general research shows that mixed-use development creates fewer trips or reduces VMT because of just the proximity of different uses. I think what the South Bay Sustainable Strategy talks about is not so much mixed use, but we always struggle with the word. It's not really high density, but high diversification of uses within certain areas, so that you are providing a community with a lot of uses within a very close proximity to where people live. And that's a little bit of a different strategy than traditional TOD mixed use. I think that works, but I think that the South Bay strategy is an even more interesting kind of model of really promoting a diverse array of uses in close proximity to each other in an area that's located within the center of a community, or what could be a community center.
I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. I will, in fact, bury the idea of vertical mixed use. It's buried with this car that Moshe was talking about. The SUV.
Hey, Wally. Jeremy Klopp, Principal with Fair and Beers Transportation Consultants. I'd like, particularly Dan and Judy, maybe for you to talk a little bit about CEQA guidance and how some of the changes coming out of the Office of Planning and Research and the changes in ways that we measure greenhouse gas emissions and mobile emissions in particular, where you see that headed, and how we can help cities, and especially elected officials, better translate that fairly high-level guidance and what seems to be esoteric legalese and sometimes technically challenging things to figure out related to VMT and air quality. Can you talk a little bit more about where you see that going, and what particular innovations we as practitioners and maybe as electeds and staff can be helping to implement toward these goals?
Well, I suspect you're a lot more expert than we are on that, but what he's talking about is that when we do these environmental impacts EIRs for new developments, we've always based upon these traffic engineering analyses about whether they create more congestion or not, and that's been overturned. So the new approach is to think about it, how it is affecting VMT, and how is it affecting accessibility. So it's a whole new way of thinking about it, and I'm not in the details of it, but it seems like it is in its own way fairly revolutionary, and it's a good, I think almost anyone in the profession would say it's a good change. I don't know, I mean, you tell us what we can do to help and support that.
So let me say that one of the things that we see happening here in Southern California, and it gets back to this warehouse location issue, we're seeing a lot of warehouses being located out in the Inland Empire, Riverside, Moreno Valley. And what will happen, I fear, is the goods will come in our ports. They will be transported all the way out to the Inland Empire. They will be sorted and then put on trucks that come back in to distribute within the city. So a CEQA analysis that takes that into consideration, the VMT with that and the air quality impacts on that would be a good thing. What I think a good direction would be is that we utilize some of the warehouse space that's more centrally located, if it's underused and available, and we start concentrating some of the goods in those locations so we're not going all the way out to Timbuktu and then coming back in. So these are issues that we grapple with, but we need to be addressing them.
And Jeremy, I have one comment on the CEQA changes. As I understand it, I'm certainly no expert in it, but that they're talking about reducing all VMT, and I think there needs to be a distinction between carbon VMT and zero emission VMT, and this does not do it. And I think we can do so much better by reducing the carbon VMT without touching the overall VMT. So that's just another perspective. What was another question? A few more questions, and then we're going to go on.
Hi, I'm Kristen Torrance, calling with the LA County Chief Sustainability Office. Thank you to the South Bay and LARC for co-hosting this today. It's a really important discussion. I'm thinking at the regional level and the sub-regional level is such a crucial piece to that conversation. And we've heard about, Wally gave an interesting presentation on the land use side and the transportation side, innovation being the theme. I heard a lot of innovation and sort of gadgetry thinking, which is in a lot of ways code sometimes for innovation on the transportation side, some really visual innovation on the land use side. And I think those are the strategies for climate action planning. I'd like to hear from you about the process side of the climate action planning and the implementation of this. And I went to the climate action planning, and I'm sure some of the folks here were also there, at a statewide conference on climate action planning. And I thought the most innovative part of that was actually on the process and how do you talk to real people about these strategies, because I think that the actionableness of these plans come from people being on board. We heard from one particular strategy of expanding bike lanes being difficult, and you hear from the same folks saying, I don't like this particular strategy, but how are we innovatively having that conversation on how to implement the plans that the South Bay cities are adopting?
Well, I'll take one cut at that, and that is that it is a real challenge because we've got neighborhoods, we've got cities, counties, MPOs, multiple state agencies, transit operators, and many of these changes have to be made, have to have leadership at the local level for a lot of what we're talking about. And so, so like I'm on a state board, and we have money to spend, and we have rules to it that we can adopt. But at the end of the day, somehow it's got to make its way down to the local level, and even as I guess you're implying, the individual level. A lot of things we're talking about is individual behavior, and people can't expect a good to be delivered in 2 hours when they order it. I mean, that's bad for creating a lot of extra truck VMT and so on. We do need people to think about a little bit of that collectiveness, which is not real American, but we're getting used to it a little bit, but a little more of that, and it's going to be a gradual process. So what we're talking about here it really is complex, and that's why I endorse what Wally and Jackie and what's going on here is because there's all kinds of constraints, in terms of behavior, in terms of institutions. The transit operators operate under 100 different constraints in terms of what they can do. And that's what's so exciting about what's going on here is let's find some of those opportunities and go after them. And I think the money will flow, just to be, it's odd for me as the academic to be talking about money all the time, but money is what's going to facilitate a lot. The cities and counties don't have a lot of capabilities. They don't have the staff, people thinking about it. And so at the state level, and to some extent at MPO level, we need to start channeling some of these monies to people that are doing creative and innovative stuff. And that's why Judy and I are here championing you in terms of trying to get you more money.
Is really the great big umbrella for reducing greenhouse gases under AB 32. And there's money in the pot to help make that happen. But then when that filters down to the local level, you're looking at something entirely different. There's no money, virtually very little money, and every local government is a little bit different from the one next door. And so the climate action plan in Hawthorne is going to look different from the one in Torrance. But that is important, that there are those distinctions, and that one size doesn't fit all. That was what we said here earlier. My city is pretty different. We're kind of hilly, and we had this discussion last night. Well, biking doesn't work really well as a means to get to work in my community, because you've got to be a pretty good super athlete to ride around those hills and get to work. But that's the point, that in some other communities, a bike plan to get to work or to get to the store does make sense. So it is a complex situation to plan all of these things. But I do think what we're doing here is so unique and so important as a different way of thinking about how we fit the things together. How do we fit land use plans together with this neighborhood electric vehicle concept? And I think it's certainly well worth looking at, experimenting with, and setting an example, if we can, for other communities, because it certainly is applicable to other communities.
Judy, try electric bikes.
Well, we had electric bikes as a demonstration at one of our Air Resources Board meetings, and that's kind of a neat thing. Yeah, it's kind of a neat thing.
And I'm going to interrupt to say that Judy and Dan have, in fact, been very supportive of us going forward with our full-scale deployment, and so we would not be doing it without your help. So it's on the way, and it's working. Now, I've got just a few more things to show. You guys can sit. Oh, Dan and Judy are both going to go. They've got ARB meetings tonight. So
tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow. So they're going to leave in about an hour or something like that. But they will be around through this next little segment and can answer any questions if you want to direct questions to them. But for now, because we want to have a lunch break at 12:15, let's do this, and then I'll be another few minutes, I hope, to answer questions about this. This is kind of a very provocative section. This is where I know I'm going to lose Marlon, but we've talked about this stuff over the years. So go ahead and turn on the. Thank you for doing this. Okay, so one of the questions I usually get is, well, all that's good, neighborhood centers, okay, that's great. How do we actually go about doing that? And so this is a stab at answering that question, unasked today, but has been asked at other times. Except we're about to sit in the dark, so. All this stuff is magic as far as I'm concerned. Really, when I first gave presentations years ago, we had, like note cards, or you kind of memorize stuff, and you're going to go through cards. The idea. In fact, part of the experiment today is there a threshold beyond which there are too many PowerPoint slides, and people start to pass out in their seats and fall forward. Okay, so here we go. So here's all this. So here's what we found out about neighborhood centers. If you're going to design one, how would you go about doing it? And there are three key variables: density, and we know that it needs to be at least 4 businesses an acre. We're pushing that envelope and trying to go to 10, 20, 30, 40 businesses an acre. It's doable, but anyway, density is an issue. You have to have dense destinations. And the question about vertical mixed use is, you see, you're taking away from the magnetism of the attraction. You want it to be highly magnetic, and to do that, you have to have every destination that anyone could want needs to be there. So you put in housing, you're taking away from that magnetism. The scale of it's important. We've got a couple of examples of very, very dense, small, like 6 businesses in a cluster. Not going to get it done. You have to have 100 to 300. We're pretty sure. And then the contents. Now here it gets into another data question, and the state is listening. we're going to argue that zoning and the building volume and all that is kind of interesting, and it's a traditional city planning tool. But it's the North American industrial classification. In other words, what goes on inside those buildings that you have to start paying attention to, because that's the destinations. So you have a gas station, somebody built a gas station, now it's a flower shop. Well, it still looks like a gas station, but it's a flower shop, so it's a different destination. So these are the kinds of things you have to look at. So the number of, I don't know how all this works with NAICS, but they come in 3, 4, and 5 digits, and so at the 3-digit level, you want to have a bunch of them present. And we're referred to a variety as within the mix. The mix is the number of NAICS, and the variety is the choices within any particular NAICS. And we know that the 445 code, which is food and beverage, is extremely important to have there, even if it's a small scale kind of thing. So these are kind of the design parameters. And here's the stuff that goes on. One of the questions that we were talking about when we put the slideshow together was, what are you going to do there? All right, rooftops, solar, air conditioning, so it can function as a cooling center. We can do, it's a multi-mobility hub, so that it's a place where you would come to make connections. And this is a great opportunity for public transit to kind of get more competitive in the mobility services market. So it's not just Uber and Lyft, but transit, maybe microtransit of some sort. But it has a chance to grow and become more competitive in this area. So we distinguished, we took the list of total NAICS, and some of them are just employment centers. And some of them are places that drive walk-in traffic, drive customer traffic. So a food store drives customer traffic, a school drives customer traffic. And so we made a list of those. And so we're looking at places that have a high proportion of the NAICS that involve destination traffic. We can do printer cartridge recycling. We can do Amazon lockers. We can do, we're talking about charging stations there. We're talking about meeting spaces, shared workspaces, outdoor amenities, pop-up markets and stuff. And I'll show you why in a second. There's this slide I'm about to show that when I first got it from Buck and Aaron, I thought this couldn't possibly be true. Now, here's the question. Here's the answer to the mixed use. This is what I would call the walk score fallacy. High walk scores, okay, no center will offer all the destinations needed by the neighborhood. So about half the trips we know are going to go outside the neighborhood. On the other side, no neighborhood will economically support all the destinations present. So the typical smart growth argument is, oh, look, we've got all these destinations here, and you can just walk to it. Yeah, you can, but the problem is that you don't economically support them. In Riviera Village, where we did the analysis, 90 cents out of every dollar that's spent there comes from outside walking distance. So this idea of having a great walk score can also be interpreted, oh, it drives a lot of car traffic in order to support itself. So, and that's the problem with your vertical mixed use. So I said what we want is a network of centers. So it looks something like this, so that everybody is within a half a mile of a center. That's what that's our ideal vision of where we're going. And it works like this. In a 3 square mile area, back to that original 3 square mile map I showed you with circles on it, there's 49 centers in that 3 square mile. And the goal that we should be working towards is, and here's the sort of breakdown. So in a half a mile, half of the trips will be captured. The next half a mile to 1, another 25%. 1 to 2 miles, 15%. So it's a gravity kind of thing. The further away you get, the less likely you're going to go there, unless it has very unique destinations. So it has to be planned as kind of a system, which again gets back to the Council of Governments, which is a multi-jurisdictional planning agency. And the COG would need to be the one to fill in these holes and help adjacent cities know where and how they should be citing their neighborhood centers. So we showed you can do this through redevelopment from scratch. We already did the Prairie and 182nd example and the Hawthorne Boulevard example for housing. But we can also remodel the floor plan. And so how do we do that? Okay, so first off, I can't do it without talking to city staff, because every city is going to be different. And so we've done that a little bit with a couple of the cities. We have to look at the ones that are getting, where the area where there's a lot of already customer traffic, and we have to follow where there's vacant space happening, because you can't just go in with a magic wand and say, well, no, this is what we're going to do here. And looking in particular at retail vacancies as they come up, and being able to capitalize. Now, that's the idea of a plan, that when the phenomenon you're worried about starts to happen, then you're ready with your plan to go in, as opposed to standing there saying, oh, geez, we've got a whole lot of retail vacancies, now what do we do? So, and that means talking to developers and owners. So this whole business of neighborhood center stuff, it takes a lot more effort. Okay, so here's a little destination analysis. What we did, and this is the NAICS business, and I just want to share this with you quickly. This is Hermosa Beach, and this is these are hot spots, hot zones, and that's Main Street that comes down from PCH. PCH is north and south. And you can see there's a concentration, this high number of businesses per acre already on Pier Avenue, close to PCH. Here's the map that had just stunned me. Here's Hermosa Beach. The commercial zones are in red, and you can see, if you can look carefully, there's a lot of black dots that are in there to show the actual businesses in those zones. The map on the right shows all residential. And look at the businesses. Do you know there are more businesses in residential zones in Hermosa Beach than there are in the commercially zoned areas? Which, to me, kind of then puts a big question, is what are we doing with zoning when there, in fact, and there's more of them. It's like 60% of the total businesses are in the residential areas. This comes through if you get the NAICS database. This is Dun & Bradstreet, also very expensive, also something the state ought to be buying for every single city, so you can start looking at these things yourself. And we have these things for, this is Redondo Beach. Heat map, you can see there's a, up around Artesia, down sort of in the middle, and then at the bottom on PCH, and then at the bottom is Riviera Village. It's in red because it was the star performer of the original 8 neighborhood study that we did. This is where all the good stuff comes from, the percentage of walking, the percentage of the traction, and so forth. And then here's Redondo Beach. You get the same thing. More businesses in the residential zones. So when you talk about what we're doing in the center, and one of the things we're going to say is, well, we want this to be for business support. This is what we're talking about. I have a small business. I work at home. And I always heard for meeting space. I wish I had better, larger scale printers. I wish I had all kinds of technology I need that I wish I could get support within walking distance of my house. I would be there every day. So how would we go about this? What we've talked about is where on Pier Avenue, that one zone, we're back to Hermosa Beach. That's where we started looking, putting in a neighborhood center there. And one might think, oh, downtown? No. Closer to PCH, not on PCH. That would be our choice. This is Redondo Beach, and up along Artesia, there's a set, and over on the right is where the Galleria is. So somewhere in there, depending on how the real estate is breaking, that is where we would try to put, start a neighborhood center. Then again, in the middle, there's PCH Middle, PCH North. These all have names, by the way. And then down, I wouldn't do anything in Riviera Village. It's absolutely perfect as it is. But this is the kind of analysis that we would do for each city. We've got this for Carson, and we've also got this for the peninsula. Limitations of time, can't do it. But I just want you to see what happens when you look within the building. You get a whole different power of analysis and analytical tools that are available to you. Okay, so there's that. Now one more block, and then I'll be done for now. Won't get rid of me that easy. Okay, so technology. We talk about technology all the time. So far as I know, we're the only unit around here that talks about technology. The MPOs don't really, I mean, here we are awash in technology-driven change, and no one's incorporated it in their plan. So this is our somewhat clumsy attempt, perhaps, at doing that. So we're talking about connectivity, we're talking about access to remote destinations. In other words, well, you'll go on to see them here. Business support, and it makes it programmable. So Jackie mentioned, we're in negotiations to try to get a gigabit per second backbone network into every city, and it would be connecting all of these neighborhood centers as well. So you would go down there to get very high speed. You can buy stuff at home, but here's something that you can go shared use. This is the shared use. It's no different from sharing a ride somewhere. You can share a network and the technologies that connect to it. We want to have group access to some of these places that are distant. So the whole idea of distance education, telemedicine, digital medicine, Kaiser Foundation, we had a meeting with them, and they're way out in front with their digital medicine program. They need this kind of connectivity, and the neighborhood centers, they're crazy about the idea that they could deliver services in there into a collective spot that people can walk to. Virtual reality suite. I've read some literature where it says public policymakers are going to be all avail themselves of virtual reality, because you can simulate and put your decision makers in the room with what it is now and what it's going to be in the future. So this whole idea of a civic component to it. Distributed work, shared workspace for maybe 1% of the household. It's the infrastructure of telecommuting. And this is happening. When you look at the charts between transit ridership going down, telecommuting going up. And so again, if you're going to plan for something that's kind of happening so you're not caught with your hands in your pockets, this is a good opportunity to start looking at that. Video conferencing, meeting spaces. I spend more money, Mojo and I go to Pam's around the corner from my house. I spend more money sitting there having a meeting because we eat eggs and coffee and hash browns and sausage and stuff like that. And the big thing is this is a digital economy. So if this were 1820, you might have lathes out there for people to come. What are the means of production in the economy that you're working in? So you might go have a metal lathe or a wood lathe in 1820. Here we're talking about an entire array of technologies that if you throw open to the public through some sort of public technology suite, they can come in and use. And no one talks about this. In fact, we were just at a conference where no one talked about it, and they should. There's kind of a job apocalypse coming through artificial intelligence. Who knows how bad it's going to be, but the data say 3/4 of all the jobs in the United States can ultimately be automated. And we're not just talking about retail clerks and they are going to be automated. We're not talking about fast food and that is going to be automated. We're talking about lawyers and doctors, people who read x-rays. This across the board. This is going to be a hellacious impact within 5 years. And so what we're saying is if you put out this infrastructure, allow people to go use it how they wish, then you're having some small sort of counterpoint to this loss of jobs that we're going to experience. And so what else is in it? Here's all these different suites depending on what the neighborhood wants to do. So there's a civic component, which is you get together and say, we've got a limited amount of money, what do we want to buy? Do we want to get photo production? I mean, the whole idea of photo production today is like tremendous. You can do all kinds of software and video editing and video production and audio production and gaming, and you can read the list. My favorite is neighborhood theaters. I have a home theater of some quality. And everyone loves to come over because it's great to look at a big screen and all that. Well, there's no reason why you couldn't have it at the neighborhood scale. And like some of these places have the living room where there's 30 seats or something. Anyway, lots of stuff. So what would it look like? So here's back to Larry Onaga and his drawings. This is some sort of fabrication of what it would look like inside of the neighborhood center. Here's a wall of 3D printed jewelry or other kinds of things. 3D printing is a lot oriented to jewelry right now. And it's about the software. So maybe you don't just want to make the 3D things, but you want to design the software that makes the 3D things. There's a whole opportunity to make money here. Now I did a pilot of this in 1995. Granted, these are terrible photos because I pulled them off of my website. But it was in the Compton Transit Center, and this is the floor plan, the shaded areas. We had kiosks outside, we had in the hallway, we had a video conferencing center, we had a little telework center, we had computer access. Back in '94, I mean, we wouldn't do that today, but we had this little shared work center. We had, here was Walter Mosley doing a book reading in Pasadena to a black audience in Compton. Every one of them asked a question, by the way. It was really empowering. The computer sharing. This was a small business development lecture. This was a big meeting room where we had several times big community meetings. This is Cal State Dominguez Hills, distance education coming into our video conferencing. This was a storyteller in Pasadena who were teaching these little kids reading stories and puppets and stuff. Yes, over a video. Yes, very effective. This is a fellow using the kiosk out in the hallway. Now, we're going to finish up with this. I asked Buck to take a look at 3D printing as a case in point. So they come in all different sizes. They're printing airplane wings with it. They're printing automobiles, as Dan mentioned. They're printing houses. There's all kinds of stuff you can print with 3D. This is a model of a building in the construction industry. This is where kids ask the printer to print something for it, and it does it right in front of them. Oh, and they're blind kids. So then they'll touch it when it comes out. And the medical industry is crazy with prosthetics and things like this. So what we're talking about is putting 3D printers in at the neighborhood level and giving people very, very discounted, low-cost access to them so they can do their own thing so that in case they lose their job, they've got another thing they can be doing. Okay, that's it. Now I'm really done. We have one more set of questions, and then lunch. And then, as I said, I'm doing the fun part. Moser Rhodes, who's been my longtime friend and collaborator, is going to take you into the weeds. So those of you who came interested to hear climate action done in a very deep sort of the methodology and the data and so forth, Moser's going to come up and talk about it. She does the hardest. She's doing the heavy lifting. I have the phone. Take a few questions. Whatever you want to do.
I think since it's 12:15, we probably should go on to lunch. I wanted to say a couple of things. One is that the presentations will be up on our website, so you don't have to take pictures of them. The other thing I want to say that I want to just reinforce, when Wally talks about the economics of mixed use or what's supporting the economic centers, we actually had an economic consultant that came out and looked at how these things are profitable. So each of the things that we've talked about along the way, we've had a consultant that's worked with us. Marlon helped with these analyses as well. And so we have, if you look at some of our reports, you'll see the actual experts that informed a lot of this, and I wanted to make sure that came out. If we will all be around informally to ask questions, so please, lunches are outside, they're in the hallway. Don't leave. The afternoon is going to be very interesting, and I want to, oh yes, and we also have a speaker coming up right at the beginning of the after lunch. So thank you very much for your attention this morning. Let's get our lunch and come back and ask questions and talk.